I'm back, and I'm about to go on another PG&E diatribe. I'm just worried that I do read in the news that people are outraged, and I just want to make sure that this kind of stays at the forefront, because this could be our new norm where we are, and it cannot be. I did read in the news that one person may have passed away during this as soon as the power went out because their oxygen tank basically was cut off from an energy source. And I could totally see that happening. I'm actually surprised more people didn't die. I mean, this is nuts. Nuts, nuts, nuts. Especially when we had zero wind where we live. Zero. The fact that they can essentially decide who lives or dies to me is just crazy. They shouldn't be able to just cut off power to hundreds of thousands of people that are not necessarily in a high risk area for fire because of wind, because we had no wind up here this time. Like, there was no wind here when they cut it off, none. Maybe there was in some other pockets, but apparently they can't just cut off those little areas because we don't have microgrids. They have to cut off power to everybody. Are you serious right now? How is that okay? And then I was reading that apparently, I guess San Diego has a better system, like they have microgrids, so they can actually cut off the power to different areas. But we don't have that up here. We pay so much money in taxes and everything else. Our PG&E bills are not inexpensive, and the rates keep going up. But for some reason, they can't pull it together and figure that out, so that we actually are technologically more advanced instead of an antiquated system that no longer works. So they were able to roll out those smart meters really quick. Pretty much everybody got a smart meter, but they can't seem to figure out how to do this, to upgrade our infrastructure so that, because the weather patterns haven't changed. We get winds every year this time of year. When I lived in Southern California 20 years ago, we had Santa Ana winds every year. It's like, it's every year. Everybody knows it's every year. Okay, and so how come all of a sudden we have huge fires the last few years? Infrastructure's failing. They don't have the microgrids. They're not clearing the trees, cutting branches, clearing the brush near the power lines. That has to happen, guys. That has to happen. Okay, so if you're like, no, they can't cut the trees in my yard, you're part of the problem. They have to be able to do that within a certain number of feet of all the power lines. That has to happen. This is also why we're having these wildfires, because that has not happened in years. And part of it is landowners having issues, part of it is environmental groups having problems with it, and then part of it is PG&E likes to cut corners. That's my opinion. Because they were able to get those smart meters out awfully quick. And that couldn't have been an inexpensive thing. But yet they can't upgrade their equipment and come up with a microgrid system where they actually could just cut out power to a high-risk area where there might actually be wind, versus cutting out power to hundreds of thousands of people. Really? This is the best we can do, guys? And I have a theory on the microgrids too. I think that the reason they are dragging their feet on that is because then they would open themselves up to a little bit of competition. Because that's where we live. We live in a world right now where we are in the United States, capitalism, and you should have competition. If you don't have competition in a certain market, you basically have a monopoly. That's not allowed. You're not supposed to be able to do that here. And there's a reason for that, because they can do whatever the heck they want, and there's no one checking them. No one. This isn't okay. So here in this last power outage last week, which I'm guessing is our new norm, I heard of one person who passed away basically right away as soon as the power was cut, because their way of getting oxygen was no longer there. People with medical devices, people will die, guys. This is bad. And I'm so fired up about this because I just feel for people who are disenfranchised, people who don't have the ability to maybe care for themselves 100%, and then also people that don't have the funds, like people that are struggling month to month. This is not okay. So now you cut off power to them and they have to now replace everything in the refrigerator, which for some of us, That's a few $100s you would have rather have spent somewhere else. For them, that might have been their entire monthly grocery allowance. Seriously? So, and then you're telling them they have to go out and buy a generator? Okay, so a $500 generator, somebody who's making, barely making ends meet, they're supposed to go out and buy a generator. And then put gas in it. Okay, gas is not inexpensive right now. Let's say you get a gallon an hour. That's 24 gallons a day. That's $100 a day in gas, if not more. So they're supposed to be able to afford that? And let's not negate the fact that that's now noise pollution and actual pollution, right? Because we're all expelling all of that into the air every single day, 24/7. How's that okay? It's just the lunacy and just how idiotic this is just beyond baffling to me. Just beyond baffling. Like, I am floored that this was the answer. This is not the best we can do. This is not the best we can do, and PG&E knows that. They do. They know that. And, they could roll out those smart meters, but no, we can't get a better infrastructure where we are not at risk because the weather patterns haven't changed. They haven't changed. It's always been this way. I just don't get it. And it's, I'm infuriated. And if you're not infuriated, you should be. And I know that a lot of people are outraged. I'm just worried that the further we get away from the event, that if this becomes the new norm, what? This can't happen every year. This cannot happen every year. And the fact that we had no wind is what really gets me where we are. I know they had some fires in Southern California, but where we are, no wind, nothing. And they were saying, 3 to 5 days. And then at one point it was like, oh, maybe it'll be 7. I just don't get it. I don't get it. And, now everybody, I would assume everyone's looking at solar, which I think is great. But what I didn't realize is if you had solar, that actually didn't really help you when the power went out, because for most people it ties into the lines with PG&E so that it goes to PG&E, so if you have an excess, you sell it to them, right? And then it comes back to you. Well, that line was cut off. So if you're not completely off the grid, which most people are not, you had no power. Really? And then also, with the point that people could die, there were cell towers that were down. I know people across town that their cell phones did not work at home. Because normally they're in sort of a dead cell area, they need their Wi-Fi for their cell phones to work. So if there was a real emergency or a real evacuation or something really necessary that they needed to know, there was absolutely no way for anyone to tell them. 0. That's not okay. This is not the best we can do. This is not the best we can do. We need to have some sort of grassroots effort that really just screams PG&E needs to upgrade their infrastructure now. This needs to become a priority. The fires that happened up here 2 years ago and then last year, they've had plenty of time to figure this out, and this is not the best we can do. It's just not. Because if the best we can do is that everyone has a generator in their yard, number 1, that's a fire hazard. Huge fire hazard. Number 2, that's causing a great deal of pollution. Number 3, most people can't afford it. Number 4, some people might not even be able to utilize it properly. Like, that is not the answer. This is not the answer. We have to do something about this. This is just wrong. It's just wrong. And we can't allow PG&E, they are essentially playing with our lives. And I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but this is true. They're kind of playing God. They can decide who lives and dies, in my opinion. Because if you can just flip a switch and turn the power off, and people who need the power to live and sustain life, they're going to die. So that means they have power over who lives and dies. And that is God. That's crazy. They should not be able to do that. And the people at the top, I'm not worried about them. The executives, you know, it's just disgusting to me because they're filing bankruptcy because they don't want to have anything to do with or pay for anyone who actually suffered during the last wildfires, of which did affect my family personally because my aunts lost their home and barely got out with their lives because their neighbor had to come knocking on their door, banging on it at some ungodly hour of the morning, of which my aunts were actually freaking out thinking that maybe somebody was trying to break in. Thankfully, they actually answered the door. Otherwise, they would not be here today because he had to help them open up their garage door to get the car out. They barely made it out in a firestorm. Crazy stuff, crazy. So we don't want a repeat of that. I don't want a repeat of it. Nobody does. But the answer is not to just randomly turn off the power when we have zero wind. And that is not the best we can do. It is not. So if you want to believe that's the best we can do, then you can just stick your head in the sand and you can think that if you want, but this is not the best we can do because the weather pattern hasn't changed. We've always had this has always been an issue, but we've never had the wildfires that we've been having the last few years. And you have to ask yourself why. Poor infrastructure, and they're not clearing the brush and cutting back trees and taking down branches. That has to happen. That has to happen. Okay? And I know that if you're someone who's like, no, we can't cut down the trees. Like I love trees too. I do. I love trees. We have trees and bushes all over our property. All indigenous plants. Love it, love it, love it. But if I lived out in the country and I had a power line running across my property, I would not want trees or brush anywhere near it. Because that is just waiting. That's just an opportunity for a fire on your property. That should not be allowed. So we need to get over ourselves on that one. We do. So, but that's the part that we have to own. But this is just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. You know, the executives at the top should be ashamed of themselves. Ashamed of themselves. They should lose their jobs. And if our local officials and our senators and congressmen and the governor does not do something, and I did hear him talking about it and basically chastising PG&E, but if that's just lip service and nothing actually changes, he needs to go too. Like I'm just not kidding. This is not okay. Not okay. And, you know, and if you're like, oh, whatever, a few businesses lost money. This is a bigger deal than that. This is a much, much bigger deal than that. Because not everyone can afford to not work for a few days. Not everyone can afford to lose everything in the refrigerator. Not everyone can afford to have the power out if their life depends on it. Really? I don't know. I feel so strongly about this, and I'm just worried that the further away we get from the actual event, that people are going to forget about it, because that's what happens. I mean, that's actually human nature, right? Human nature, the further you just get into your routine, you just kind of forget. It's not that you forget, it's not a priority. This needs to be a priority. We need to take action. This needs to be a change that happens now. If San Diego electrical company down there, if they can have more advanced technology so that they can actually cut power to just limited pockets, PG&E can do it too. They absolutely can. It's just a matter of them actually spending money on that, right? And you'd think, why wouldn't they? But I know why they wouldn't, because if they don't have to, you know, and nobody's really pushing them to do it, then why, right? I mean, this is why the San Bruno explosion happened, because their infrastructure's horrible. It's aging. It needs to be replaced. We need microgrids. And maybe we need PG&E to go bye-bye, right? Maybe we need somebody else to come in and take over this, because they suck, in my opinion. They do. And I think that the people at the top are morally bankrupt, because I don't know how you can, in thinking about our lives and the people that they service, The best solution they could come up with is turn off the power. That is not the best solution they could come up with. That just might have been the cheapest one. So we need to do something. This needs to change. We need to hold them accountable. We need to hold our government officials accountable. We need to hold Governor Newsom accountable. This has to change. We need to stay on them. This cannot be our new norm in California. We are not in a third world country. We rely on electricity here. You know, and people also, if you lived out in a rural area and you have a well, you had no water. Because the well uses electricity to pump the water up. I mean, there's just so many ways this is wrong. So many ways this is wrong. And we have to do something about it. So I'm going to stay. I'm just going to keep talking about it. Because until I see that there's some major change, I'm just going to keep talking about it. Because it infuriates me that they have the power of life and of taking away our power and potentially people die. To me, that's just ludicrous. This isn't the best they could do. They know it. We know it. This was just the cheapest thing that they could do. Because it really does come down to dollar and cents. It has nothing to do with lives and people. It has everything to do with dollars and cents. So I hope you'll stand with me and hold their feet to the fire, because this has to change. This can't stay the same. And that's my opinion.